What's up guys, DK here with Collector's Impact, and today, this is going to be a pretty fun video. We're going to go over the PSA grading scale from 1 to 10. We're going to define what each grade is supposed to be according to PSA's own grading standards, and look at some examples of each grade. But before we jump into it, if you wouldn't mind, please give this video a thumbs up if you find it helpful. It really helps the channel and the algorithms and all that kind of stuff, and I greatly appreciate that. And subscribe to the channel for more content like this in the future. Alright, let's go ahead and start with a PSA 1 and then work our way all the way up to the PSA 10. And now remember, again guys, this is going to be in PSA's own words what makes each grade what it is, theoretically at least. I mean, there's lots to discuss about that, but this is what PSA has defined and released out there in the public record with how they grade the cards. So this is not my words, this is directly from PSA when I talk about the extreme specifics. Alright, so how PSA determines if a card is a 1. In their own words, and I quote, "A poor card may be missing one or two small pieces, exhibit major creasing that nearly breaks through all the layers of the cardboard, or it may contain extreme discoloration or dirtiness throughout that may make it difficult to identify the issue or content of the card on either the front or back. A card of this nature may also show noticeable warping or another type of destructive defect." All right, guys. So, yeah, PSA 1 is the lowest grade that PSA will issue. All right, so let's take a look at this Charizard and scrutinize it pretty heavily. So, the eye appeal for this particular card isn't terrible, but let's go ahead and look in detail here. When you start really inspecting the surface of this card, you can see, okay, there's a crease here, there's a crease here, there's a major crease here in the top, and then boom, there's like a huge crease where somebody just decided that they were going to put it out like a cigarette butt and just jammed it into the ground or something. I always think of PSA 1 cards as the kind that like a bully would grab and destroy, like you're out on the playground or something in middle school and they're like, "Hey, you like Pokemon? I'm going to take your Charizard." You know, that's like, who does this to a card other than a scenario like that? You know what I mean? So this is just basically where the owner of the card was extremely careless with it, or maybe like a toddler got a hold of it or something, like somebody's little brother or sister or whatever running around the house, and they got a hold of their sibling's card and just went to town with it. I don't know, but anyway, you can see here there's the crease on the back. So that's another thing to note with PSA 1s. The creasing is usually so bad that it's all the way through the card. Boom, all the way through. You've got, of course, tons of edge wear, other major creases. I mean, it's just basically, you know, there's really not much else to say. It's just a terrible condition card, but it's real and it's pretty much complete. They said that it can be missing one or two pieces, but yeah, it's pretty much complete. Let's go ahead and jump into PSA 2. A PSA 2 grade of good is defined as the following. A PSA 2 card's corners show accelerated rounding and surface wear. It's starting to become obvious. A good card may have scratching, scuffing, or light staining, or chipping of enamel on obverse. There may be several creases. Original gloss may be completely absent. Card may show considerable discoloration. Centering must be 90-10 or better on the front and back. So meaning it's not off-center. So, I mean, it's slight off-centering, as you can even see in this one. You can see the left to right there is off-centering, but not so much so that it qualifies as an OC, to get an OC stamp on it. So, yeah, basically the PSA 2 is a PSA 1 without the extreme damage to it. It's still heavily played. It's got some serious and noticeable issues. You can see here, like, the edges of this card are so beat that you can see the foil straight through on pretty much the entire border of this card. When you bring it down and look at the surface, it definitely has some big scratches and things like that. and some mild like thumb style creasing in the card. So like right there in the corner. It's been mishandled, but more so from just heavy use than actual damage and putting it out like a cigarette. All right, let's go ahead and jump into a PSA 3 example here, guys. So a PSA 3 is defined as the following. It is a card that reveals some rounding of the corners, though not extreme. Some surface wear will be apparent, along with possible light scuffing and light scratches. Focus may be somewhat off-register, and edges may exhibit noticeable wear. Much but not all of the card's original gloss will be lost. Borders may be somewhat yellowed and or discolored. A crease may be visible. Printing defects are possible. Slight stain may show on obverse, and wax staining on reverse may be more prominent. Centering must be 90-10 or better on the front or back. So same kind of centering rules from this point moving forward, I'm sure. I mean, until you start getting into the much higher grades. But yeah, I mean, you can see how this is going, right? So the 3, it's just slightly above that 2. In terms of, you can see the borders here are still silvered, but not as bad as the 2 was. You can also see when you inspect the surface, there's a pretty decent scratch right there. But other than that, that's the biggest defect on this PSA 3 to worry about. Let's see the back. So what makes this particular card, in my opinion, a PSA 3 and not higher is this over here in the corner. You can see right here, there is a thumb style crease in the corner where somebody slapped it down on the table when they were playing it, and it caused that edge to rise a little bit, and it's got some creasing in the actual cardboard. But it's not an extreme crease, and when you look at it on the front, it doesn't necessarily translate through as a super crease. It is there. It is noticeable that the card is misshapen there or bent or whatever, but it's not super creased on the front side. And let's see, in the top corner there, you can see that the edge has a little pinch mark on it as well. That's what makes this Charizard a 3 versus a higher grade. All right, let's jump into the PSA 4. Very good to excellent condition 4. This is defined by PSA as a PSA 4's card's corner may be slightly rounded. It can have surface wear that is noticeable but modest. The card may have light scuffing or light scratches. Some original gloss will be retained. That's certainly the case with this, and we'll get to that. Borders may be slightly off-white. Yep. A little crease may be visible. Okay. Centering must be 85-15 or better on the front and 90-10 or better on the back. All right, so that's PSA 4 in a nutshell. The real key characteristics that separate this from the 5 and higher is that a small crease might be visible. That's really the key difference here, I think. It's basically that the eye appeal and the centering of the card is good enough to where if it does have like one small pretty major defect, or in this case a minor defect or whatever, a crease is kind of a major defect as a general rule, you know. So if the card in general looks pretty good but it has a little crease, then it'll be either a PSA 4 or, depending on your grader, it's going to be somewhere between 4 or lower. It really does depend on your grader. Just going to throw that out there. But this is an example of a 4 that does have a small crease. I will show you right here. Boom. It is a thumb crease where somebody, you know, was or it's the back of their hand actually, they and slammed it down on the table, which is ridiculous, but you can tell. I mean, that was probably 1993. A mock sapphire is definitely not the type of card that you want to be slamming on the table these days. But anyway, this particular one is a 4 because of that crease. Other than that, yeah, you can see its surface wear and everything, minor surface wear, and as it mentioned, the gloss may be retained. This card's gloss does. It's pretty noticeable. It's kind of hard to see with this reflection going on. I apologize for that, guys, but there is some actual natural gloss all over the card from where they originally printed it. You can kind of see some of it showing through. It has a little bit of shimmer to it, and it's not uncommon, or rather, it is common that some of the older Magic cards will have splotchy gloss from where they were shuffled in raw use and raw play without sleeves, because sleeving your cards wasn't really a thing back when these cards came out. That's why having PSA 10s of like a Mox or a Black Lotus, you're talking big money. Overall, the card is pretty solid. It may be a little bit faded. There's definitely some edge wear here, so you can just see the kind of like minor issues with the cards in that little crease. All right, guys, now we're at the halfway point here with the PSA 5. This is where things start to get a little bit higher quality, and you'll see why. A PSA 5 is defined as a card having very minor rounding on the corners, if any at all. Surface wear or printing defects are more visible. There may be minor chipping on edges. Loss of original gloss will be apparent. So it's not full gloss at this point. This is where the gloss is starting to fade some, but not as much as a 4 or 3 or so on and so forth. Focus of the picture may be slightly out of register. Several light scratches may be visible upon close inspection, but do not detract from the appeal of the card. Card may show some off-whiteness of borders. Centering must be 85-15 or better on the front and 90-10 or better on the back. So you'll notice one huge thing that's missing from this description versus the PSA 4, and that is the presence of a crease. Basically, yeah, if there's any creasing, it's going to be 4 or lower. So that's really your key difference. Once you start getting into the 5 and higher, no crease. So that's really the key difference between those two, between the 4 and the 5. And PSA is really strict these days when it comes to the 5s and higher. I've noticed that on the older Pokemon cards especially. They get real picky with it. I mean, like the smallest little surface imprint or whatever, like a little thumb mark, they'll consider that, PSA 3 or 2. So yeah, PSA 5 is where the value tiers start coming up, you know what I mean? So when you're talking about the market, the PSA 5 is pretty much the bare minimum for a decent quality, like a higher quality, an excellent quality card, if you will. That's really the key difference there. In terms of surface, you can see, like it said, there's some minor scratching here. There's a little tiny scratch there. There's a little tiny scratch here. And yeah, the foil itself looks pretty nice. It definitely has some good shimmer and shine. The actual artwork looks good. It is an excellent condition card, you guys. All right, and up next is the PSA 6. And I'm just going to go ahead and say that the PSA 6 is my least favorite in terms of the grading scale because it feels really arbitrary in the 10-point scale. And by that, I simply mean that, look at it, it's called excellent through mint. Well, mint is 9. So essentially, a PSA 6 is where the grader is having a hard time if they want to consider it a 5 or a 7 or an 8 or whatever. The 6 is the most... It's the most problematic slot for that reason. You really could have like a card that would qualify as a 7 or 8 that comes back as a 6 because it can really fall anywhere between excellent and mint, and it highly depends on your grader. Now that's me over here just talking about my experience with this, but I'll go ahead and tell you what PSA defines the 6 as. A card that may have visible surface wear or a printing defect which does not detract from its overall appeal. A very light scratch may be detected only upon close inspection. Corners might have slightly graduated fraying. Picture focus may be slightly off of register. Card may show some loss of original gloss, may have minor wax stain on reverse, may exhibit slight notches on edges, and may also show some off-whiteness on borders. Centering must be 80-20 or better on the front, 90-10. Or better on the reverse. So you can see it's extremely close to a PSA 5 in its description. Yeah, so PSA 6 really is, it's just one of these things where it's not quite a 5, you can tell, because it's not as scratched in the grader's perspective. It's not worthy of the near mint grade for them, and it's not as scratched or noticeably defective to knock it into the lower tiers. So they just append it with 6. All right, so now let's get into the Near Mint 7. And this is yet another area of contention between the 7 and 8. But I digress. Let's go ahead and see how PSA defines the 7 for their standards. 7 Near Mint is a card with just a slight surface wear visible upon close inspection. There may be slight fraying on some of the corners. Picture focus may be slightly out of register. A minor printing blemish is acceptable. Slight wax staining is acceptable on the back of the card only. On the back of the card only. That's pretty key. Most other original gloss is retained. Centering must be approximately 70-30 to 75-25 or better on the front and 90-10 or better on the back. So, yeah. So that's really the key difference here between the 7 and the 6. The front of the card cannot have many defects. So, God, this gloss is really annoying. I'm so sorry, guys. Yeah, I mean, you can see there, the actual card's front surface is really clean. The borders are pretty white. There's not a lot of edge wear or chipping or anything like that on this card. So if we turn it over, let's see how the back looks. See, there's a little nick right here in the corner, and there's a little bit of surface marks right here on the card. You can see, but they are really just, they almost look like little specks of dirt. I don't see any super extreme issues going on with this particular card, and this is another one of those things where this is debatable. This could be a PSA 8. 7 is just that near mint. It's what your grader is going to give it if they're not in the giving mood to give you an 8. That's pretty much it, you know what I mean? But as they define it, it has a pretty front and it can have a questionably ugly back. This one in particular, I mean, yeah, it's got some little blemishes and stuff, but there you go. There's a PSA 7. Up next is the PSA 8. This is when your grader has had a good lunch and they haven't been fighting with their significant other the previous night. Instead of giving you this, I'm just joking, you guys. There are more qualities. We'll go over that. That's but here's the PSA 8. So this is a near mint to mint 8. Is a super high-end card that appears mint 9 at first glance, but upon closer inspection, the card can exhibit the following: a very slight wax stain on reverse, slight fraying at one or two corners, a minor printing imperfection, and or slightly off-white borders. Centering must be approximately 65-35 to 70-30 or better on the front and 90-10 or better on the back. So, yeah, as you can tell also a lot by these descriptions, they're mostly talking about sports cards with the whole off-white and all that kind of stuff, because most of the cards have white borders. This obviously has a black border, so they're looking more at just overall saturation, fading, beauty of the ink itself, if the card looks vibrant or if it looks faded and aged. That's kind of how you can think about that in its descriptors. But yeah, as you can see here at first glance, this card does look like a mint 9 card, but as you really get in here and zoom in on it, you can find a couple of very small defects. So let's see if we can point one out on camera. It's kind of hard to see as I'm filming, but I can see right there in the edge of the card, there's a little bit of whitening on the edge. There's a little bit of whitening on this edge. Let's see. On the back, centering is not perfect either. You can tell the left-right alignment's pretty off. Also at the top, there is a little bit of edge wear, and that's very common on Magic cards, especially ones like the Mox Diamond that did see play. This card, even though it was well protected in sleeves and whatnot, taking it in and out of a sleeve and just pushing your thumb on the top of it will often get you that little mark. And in my humble opinion here, that is probably the key thing that made this an 8 and not a 9, is the proof of its use with that marking at the top. That seems pretty logical to me. All right, now for the 9s and 10s, I'm going to show a few examples because these are obviously the cards that people want to go after the most when you're sending in cards for grading. You either want this 9, which is basically like, I'll consider that your break-even grade, especially with some of these ridiculous pricings. I mean, this particular card, it's not break-even. That's pretty damn good with this Venusaur, as I'm sure you may be aware. But as a general rule, if you're going to send in a card that's maybe a $100 card or something like that, if it's a PSA 10, if it comes back a PSA 9, you're probably looking at at least a 50% decline, if not more, in its value. Therefore, it would be a break-even grade. That's just, I'll just throw that out there. As a general rule, people want 9s and 10s when they send in the PSA. How does PSA define a 9? 9 mint. A PSA 9 is a superb condition card that exhibits only one of the following minor flaws: a very slight wax stain on reverse, a minor printing imperfection or slightly off-white borders. Centering must be approximately 60-40, 65-35 or better on the front, 90-10 on the back. So yeah, if the alignment is off a little bit, or if it has any sort of surface issue, that's pretty much what to look for when it's talking about the wax being off. As you can tell by this one, it's pretty damn flawless. And as you can guess, a lot of the time there's a lot of debate on should it be a 9 or should it be a 10. So there's a whole bunch of theories out there in terms of the ratios, and they can only issue a certain number of 10s before it gets ridiculous. So most things just qualify as 9s, and they reserve the 10 for the most exceptional examples of the card. So with this one in particular, I think the issue is that centering. You can tell here on the left that border is ever so slightly smaller than the one on the right. Therefore, the centering is not perfect, and therefore it is a PSA 9 and not a 10. Now you may be asking, but DK, what if the card doesn't have a distinct border? Well, for the curious mind that asks such a question, here is a nice example with this Vision and Scarlet Witch. This card does not have a defined border, therefore centering is harder to calculate with something like this, even on the back. I mean, there is no super defined border, therefore centering usually isn't as big of an issue on these type of cards. So what you can look for is more in line with surface damage. This is on the case. Yeah, so with this one, the only thing that I can see on this particular example that makes it a 9 and not a 10 is this edge wear. There's a little bit of white here where the machine cut the card out during its manufacturing, and it created an imperfection. So when you're talking about super minor, little teeny minute imperfections, here's a little tiny white chip on the corner as well. And this is actually not a ding. It's actually kind of a unique thing where it was cut out and there's a little bit of white left over on that corner because it wasn't a perfectly sharp cut between the two angles. So that's what that is. And that's why it got a 9 and not a 10. Very, very minor imperfections. All right, guys, and the time has come. It is time to talk about the PSA 10s. So, a PSA 10 is a gem mint card, and this is how PSA defines it. Attributes include 4 perfectly sharp corners, sharp focus, and full original gloss. A PSA Gem Mint 10 card must be free of staining of any kind, but an allowance may be made for a slight printing imperfection. If it doesn't impair the overall appeal of the card, the image must be centered on the card within a tolerance not to exceed approximately 54 to 40% on the front and 75 to 25% on the reverse. So damn near perfect centering, you guys. All right, so looking at our example here with the Juggernaut.
Yeah, it's the Juggernaut, bitch!
You can see the centering is dang near perfect. It's kind of hard to show up on camera, but I did measure this one out when I sent it in, and it is really, really good. The overall card, of course, has no defects whatsoever. There's no chipping, no nothing. It is essentially perfect. And you can see the back is actually off a little tiny bit in comparison to the front, but just like it had in the description, that's fine. It's the front that matters the absolute most on your PSA 10s. The back does matter, of course, but the most important thing is that the card is flawless and perfectly centered, and you have a decent chance of getting a 10. It doesn't guarantee a 10. You know, there's always going to be some sort of flaw, especially when you scan it with an AI technology that's unique enough to give it a fingerprint of its own so that you can't even send it back in. I mean, obviously there's going to be some microscopic styles of imperfections on these cards. So who knows what that kind of technology implementing that's going to do in the future? I don't know. That's a whole other video and discussion to come, I'm sure. But yeah, overall, 10 is perfect. So here's an example of a Marvel card. Let me go ahead and show you some others. Here goes good old Honchkrow. PSA 10 Pokemon card. You can see here the centering on the back is pretty good. There's going to be no flaws with any of these guys. There's not a single scratch. There's not a single edge wear. It is the perfect specimen of a card. So that's Pokemon. Here goes a Magic one. This is a Japanese alternate art Samet Tyrant Smasher, I think. I don't know. Yeah, Planeswalker from War of the Spark. And you can tell, again, centering is decent, though you can tell that that is off a little bit in comparison to that. So there's some proof that you can have some slight defect there with the centering when it comes to the 10, but the overall surface and edges are flawless. And lastly, for the 10 is a sports card. Here goes good old Zion Williamson. And this is pretty much, most people are grading sports cards with PSA, so I just figured I'd throw this in here as an example. The card's saturation is flawless, the cutting is perfect, and overall everything about the card is perfect. Well, that wraps up the video for today, guys. I hope that you found the video informative, useful, entertaining, all of the above. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, as it really does help significantly with the channel, of course. And again, if you want to see more content like this in the future, please subscribe to the Collector's Impact. Thanks again, guys, for coming by, and I hope to see you again next time. Take care.